Welcome to the Court of History. I'm Sean Wilentz at Princeton University with my compadre down in Washington, Sidney Blumenthal, and the court is now in session. Sidney, we're in a very fraught moment coming off the murder of Charlie Kirk. Violence has a way of making everything much more fraught. And I'm just wondering, thinking about this moment and stepping back, actually, how much do you think what has just occurred will, has either changed or might change the already fraught situation we were in?
Yeah, we're in more than a stress test of democracy and liberalism right now. There is pressure being put, it's more than pressure, on civil society and all of its institutions, and on the courts as well, and on the legislative branch and law enforcement and so on. So violence is used as an instrument by people who do not believe in that ordinary processes of democracy work for them or are necessarily available to them for their purposes, whatever they may be. Might be very extreme, and that they can't be realized through the democratic process. So we're in a very difficult territory right now, and the calls for retribution when we don't really know what's going on only heighten this atmosphere of violence and threaten to actually aggravate the disorder.
Yes. As we know well, political assassinations of all kinds instantly lead to conspiracy theories, no matter who has perpetrated it, no matter who. It's open to the worst kinds of speculation.
Yeah, what we need right now is really an understanding of what democracy and liberalism is.
That's right. And for that, we are very, very fortunate today to have with us someone who knows a great deal about all of that and more. We talk about the great minds of our generation. Certainly, one of them is Cass Sunstein. Cass is the Robert Walmsley University professor at Harvard University, previously a professor at the University of Chicago Law School. In 2014, studies found that he is the most frequently cited American legal scholar. He is absolutely renowned for his work in U.S. constitutional law, administrative law, environmental law, and behavioral economics. He was, among other things, the administrator of the White House Office of Information and Regulatory Affairs in the Obama administration from 2009 to 2012. He is the author of many more books and articles than I could possibly list, from his first book, Democracy and the Problem of Free Speech, to his more recent, actually two books coming out, one a re-edition of his book on the Second Bill of Rights, and his real new book called On Liberalism, just published. We're going to be talking about that. Cass is also a great aficionado of Bob Dylan, which makes him, especially important in my own heart. But without further ado, I'd like to introduce to you all Cass Sunstein.
A thrill and an honor to be with you today.
Great. So, Cass, you've heard what we had to say at the beginning. On liberalism, we actually begin not only explaining to the world what liberalism really is in a way that I think most people won't necessarily come to understanding, but will understand a lot when they leave. But you also talk about liberalism and democracy's vulnerabilities. You list a number of them. And indeed, on this, we're in absolute agreement that democracy is always extremely vulnerable. But I was thinking in part, especially how violence is one of the great vulnerabilities of the system. And I wonder if you could talk about that and maybe some of the other vulnerabilities that we're facing as a democracy and that democracies always face.
Great. So let's talk about liberalism and democracy, shall we? There are some people who believe in liberalism but not in democracy.
Yes.
There are some people who believe in democracy but not in liberalism. So in Hungary, there's a enthusiasm for illiberal democracy. And in some places, the thought is William F. Buckley Jr., the kind of great conservative polemicist and charmer, was at times a liberal, small l, who was ambivalent about democracy. I think that's all wrong. My view was that Lincoln had it right, that the foundation of American republicanism, we might say democracy, is that no one can govern another person without their consent. And that's the foundation of the attack on slavery. It's the foundation of freedom broadly. Now, if you are in a liberal democracy like ours, there's a foundational commitment to freedom from fear. Roosevelt named it, but liberal thinkers were committed to it long before it was named by Roosevelt, and think of fear as existing when the government can go after you, maybe put you in jail without any kind of process, or can kill you. Or I live in Concord, Mass, and the rise of the American Revolution had something to do with freedom from fear. Then there's private deprivations and private violence. So old thinking about the social contract is the government will protect you from private marauders. And that's a liberal thought. And that means we have central commitments to the rule of law and to a form of security. Democracies, of course, are vulnerable to transgressions of their own commitments, partly because they are free-for-alls in an important sense, that it can be that the people who are governing you will be people you despise. They might think things very differently from what you think. They might be from a different background from your own, and people can get really mad. And that rage can lead to private violence. And we've had assassinations in our history. I think it's right to say that the liberal tradition, and that by this I don't mean, the left, I mean that set of commitments that anchor our country. Those commitments are vulnerable to private violence, and they stand very solidly against private violence. A great liberal moment with a capital G was RFK Sr.'s response kind of in real time to the assassination of Martin Luther King, where he gave a statement about love and not about revenge, and used the word polarization. Right. And the word love is kind of a strong liberal term. Liberals are a little nervous about that term in the public domain, but for everything there's a season. And the King assassination, the word love was the right word.
Yeah, that was one of the most extraordinary speeches in American political history, as far as I'm concerned. And he was talking about Dr. King, where so the word love does come to mind in a spiritual sense, that is, a liberal spiritual sense. But, political violence, private violence, but politically directed violence is something that, a liberal democracy, it's open to, it's vulnerable to. There's nothing in its principles, except that it has a principle against it, that can be done about it. So now that we have it unleashed yet again, those of us who are old enough to remember all the other cases, this is another one. It's not exactly the same, but another example at a much more fraught moment, I might add, in American politics than we've had before. How do we respond to that as liberal Democrats? What are we supposed to do?
First and foremost, grief for the person who was killed, for his family, those who liked and loved him. So grief is the foundation. And I think that's where we start. It unifies people. And it's also the right thing to feel. 31 years old, and, I didn't know him and I don't know a ton about him, but people who did know him, in the past tense is hateful to have to use, but speak of him with love, about his exuberance, his ability to connect, his ability to connect with people who thought very differently from how he did. So, what to say about someone who died at 31 is just to have something like mourning. That's I think the right initial reaction. It's more, I hope broadly human than distinctly liberal, but there we go. And then after that, I think to say never again is right. And that's both an insistence on our society's character. And of course, never is an aspiration rather than a prediction, and to be gentle. So Bobby Kennedy's great remarks use the word gentleness, as I remember, and that's the watchword. So to respond in any way that is saying, Trump started this, he created a culture that's horrific, or to say that, the right response to the assassination of one of ours is to get tough on them, where get tough can be threatening. That's also terrible. So, gentleness is right. Both, my own son actually was hit really hard by this, not for political reasons, just someone got killed, and he knows that both of his parents are, sometimes speaking in front of crowds, and I think that wasn't relevant. But think of 12-year-olds and 16-year-olds, and something like an embrace of all.
Yeah, I get that. The only question that I have, though, is that, one of the responses, not by us, but by those in power to this, is possibly retribution. We don't have control over that. But, very commonly throughout history, these kinds of incidents are the spark, repression of various kinds, sometimes violent, sometimes not. And so we have to try to find a way to express grief, but at the same time be vigilant, I think, about the ways in which this might be used in ways that are not only illiberal, but very, very dangerous indeed. No, I mean, we have to find a way to have both of those thoughts in our minds at the same time.
Yeah, let me just say, living in Concord, which was the center of the Transcendentalists, as well as the place where the American Revolution began. Among the Transcendentalists was their keen light who ran the Park Street Church in Boston, Theodore Parker, who said eternal vigilance is the price of history, and based on what Sean said. And there have been many calls for retribution without knowing even who the suspect is or what the source of this is, from Donald Trump on down through his supporters. They're very angry, they're very hostile, and Trump himself voiced a conspiracy theory that there would be whatever organizations and financing behind this, he would root out, as suggesting that there was such a thing as opposed to a single gunman. And we don't know what's behind this dreadful act. And I'm thinking that retribution is the preface to an intention to repress, and that certainly would be a threat. And using this as a pretext to undermine liberal democracy, and there ought to be a warning about that as well.
Okay, so I hear you. I would really have liked it, and the day is maybe in some sense young, if the White House had something a little like Bobby Kennedy's remarks. And, if after King's assassination, the response by authorities was, repressive of whatever, that would not be good. To cherish, as I think I understand Charlie Kirk himself did, freedom of speech and liberal liberty, where liberal liberty includes religious freedom, diversity of view. I gather Kirk was very keen on that and wanted to meet with people, felt differently. So I think on the day after someone's killed, grief is completely right and the central thing. And also, I want to generalize it a little bit, that people are scared who are Kirk's, compatriots in one or another sense. They think they're vulnerable, that they or their people might be shot. And that's very important to see. The day after, maybe. We're not quite there yet. To sound the vigilance note is very important, but it's very hard to see the arc of even 2 weeks after this. If we see repression of people who have particular political views, that's a violation of central commitments, I'd say constitutional commitments also, and to call them out is really crucial. And that's right. I'm very pained by and a little ambivalent about the statements in the recent past that people who have drawn analogies between the current government and the 1930s, they caused this. I'll tell you why I'm pained by that I don't think it's empirically true that they caused this. On the other hand, there's no question that drawing parallels, even very loose parallels, is, no one, I think, can say that the president is Hitler, but to say that there are authoritarian or lawless impulses that can be accompanied by saying that, of course, he's not Hitler. There's no Dachau here, and there are no aspiration to that.
We sometimes say, Cass, that Hitler set a very high standard for evil and tyranny, and one needn't match that to be terrible.
To be good, but the idea that breeds hate, I find this very painful because it's not entirely false. And yet we don't want to have censorship or any kind of attack on people who say, Biden or Trump or Obama, and I have my own views, but that they are a danger to democracy. And people have said about Biden and Obama things that I think are quite false, but that are extremely, let's say, aggressive.
Yeah. So, Cass, in your book, let's go back to your book on liberalism. You have a chapter on Hayek and Mills. Friedrich Hayek, great political philosopher, considered to be on the right, and economist, and John Stuart Mills, the great exponent of free speech and liberalism. And you define them both within the context of liberalism, and that's an interesting way of looking at it for most people, because they associate Hayek with conservatism and Mills at the other pole. And yet, what's going on now, however you define Trump, it's not what Americans had thought of as conservatism. It's beyond all of those definitions in the past, certainly free markets to begin with, and his other repressive acts. And I think the old conservatism, which you've thought of as a form of liberalism, has really been superseded here.
Okay, so let me tell you, if I may, the genesis of the book. So I wrote some notes to myself in 2022, I guess, on what liberalism is. And it was directed both against the illiberal left. It probably originated with a response to those who showed contempt for liberalism on the left as a kind of engine of racism, sexism, and imperialism and environmental degradation. And also, increasingly on the right, illiberal thinking is not just practice, but thinking, theorizing Orban, let's say, or Putin. And so I wrote these notes to myself, and I'm going to get directly to your point. They weren't really publishable, I didn't think, because they didn't have enough footnotes for an academic journal, and they were just kind of fussy for a popular outlet. But someone said, I sent it to two people, one of whom said, send it to the Times. And I thought that was ridiculous. But the person who said that actually worked for the Times. And so I did send it to the Times, and they ran it. I got notes from conservatives. Mm-hmm. Liberals too, meaning left liberals, but also right of center people saying, I agree with almost all of this. And they said, you should do this as a book because I'm a conservative, because liberalism is what I want to preserve. These are people who were very enthusiastic about Reagan, not at all enthusiastic about Obama, not enthusiastic about Clinton. They thought Bush was good, but not right wing enough. And they were self-understanding as liberals. So the idea that the book presses is that there's a big tent. I almost called it big tent liberalism, which includes emphatically Hayek, who was a free market guy who despised socialism and fascism, and he didn't want redistribution. The idea of the Great Society didn't warm his heart. He was in important ways to the right, I think, of both Reagan and Bush, certainly Reagan and Thatcher, and kind of a hero to Thatcher and Reagan, certainly a Thatcher to the American right. So he's a liberal. The rule of law is something that Hayek cherished and had a lot to say about. Freedom of speech was a very big deal for him. Private property rights emphatically, partly because they protect freedom, that if you property is yours, the government can't terrify you by threatening to take everything you have away. Hayek believed in freedom of religion, emphatically also, and he believed in security, not in the sense of, everybody gets food and money, but that you have a realm, a private realm that the government can't enter into. So his great book is called The Road to Serfdom, and it's a liberal book. So that's that liberal in the liberal tradition. So the commitment to pluralism, freedom, and the rule of law is something that certain strands of American right-wing thought are not just kind of supportive of, but emphatic about. And Hayek is our theoretical hero there. The left tends to hate him because he loved markets so much. And they think this is neoliberal guy, and a lot of terrible things have happened because of Hayekian followers. I don't agree with that, but even if it's so, he's a liberal. He's not on Putin's side. In fact, he stood his life against Putin. Okay, then there's Mill, who wrote The Subjection of Women, who was very concerned about caste hierarchies and had a conception of liberalism that had, let's say, a very strong conception of equality of opportunity that was open to redistribution, economic redistribution. This is a different thing. But this is all liberalism, and it's European and American liberalism. And I have to say, I've shifted myself over the course of the last few years. I used to think of Hayek and von Mises and the libertarian crowd as, a different team from my team, and not as enemies, not enemies, but as people who were intellectual adversaries. And I spent a lot of my scribbling against them. And the Second Bill of Rights book is emphatically against them. But this book, Liberalism, I now see them as part of my team. We're not on different teams. We're all liberals here. We have defining commitments which we share. And that is something for France or Italy or Canada or Mississippi. That's something to cherish. It's not something flaccid or enemy-free. It has enemies.
This sounds a lot like what my old mentor friend Arthur Schlesinger called the vital center. That that there is a vital center of conservatives and liberals, but we can call all of us liberals, and then there's everything outside. In his case, it was communism and fascism, and that's a way to imagine. And it's a vital center. It's not dead center. It's a vital center where we disagree about these various things, but we agree about certain fundamentals like the rule of law, free speech, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, that's really what we're trying to preserve, but in a very different world than when he was writing about it in the late 1940s.
Yeah, I have to say I get it, and I might agree with that, but I wouldn't use the terminology. There's something about vital center that I find misleading and a little tendentious and a little unvital. So, the center, we're the center, and you're, it may not be false, but I'd prefer to say liberalism.
Okay.
It has more.
Now, but Kaz, do you think that any of these ideas and even these people like Hayek and so on, who you've mentioned, have been hijacked and used as icons for purposes other than what they wrote? So The Road to Serfdom can be read today as a critique of a lot of what Trump is doing.
No, completely. And the road to serfdom has been used a lot as a critique of things like the Affordable Care Act and Great Society stuff. Now, whether that's hijacking or regrettably a fair reading of Hayek is reasonably disputed. So I think The Road to Serfdom is a genuinely great book, one of the greatest books I at least have ever read. I've read more than a few, but I think the fundamental thesis is wrong. So the claim that if you build up a society with all this non-Hayekian stuff, call it the Affordable Care Act or the Social Security Act or the National Labor Relations Act or the Clean Air Act, then you're going to end up in fascism. I think that's false. So there's that. I think the right that is enthusiastic, let's say, about tariffs and is not very free market centered. Hayek is kind of a side figure for them. So they're not enlisting him on their side. They're, either politely ignoring him or thinking he was that was so 1940s, and now we're in a new era where we need new stuff. So I think the hijackers of Hayek, I'm thinking there are some people who I really appreciate who are modern Hayekians, and they refer to him a lot. And I think they're fair. Now, it might be because I'm thinking about academics who are kind of keeping his flame alive, or public figures in some sense. And I think they're fair to him. And are they Trumpists? No. They're very ambivalent about Trump, or maybe negative about Trump. Do they like the Democrats? No. Do they prefer Trump to the Democrats? I don't know. They don't like either of them.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, unfortunately, we have lots more to talk about. We're going to have to come to a close now. We're going to have a second part to our conversation, in which we have talked, Cass. This has been our political theory seminar, or discussion about political theory, which is really, really important. I hope that in the second half we can talk about the Constitution, the law, the rule of law, the Supreme Court. You've also written eloquently about the Supreme Court. So we'll be getting to that in our second half. But for now, let me say on behalf of Sidney Blumenthal and myself, the Court of History is adjourned.
Can't get your fill of Legal AF? Me neither. That's why we formed the Legal AF Substack. Every time we mention something in a hot take, whether it's a court filing or a oral argument, come over to the Substack. You'll find the court filing and the oral argument there, including a daily roundup that I do called, wait for it, Morning AF. What else? All the other contributors from Legal AF are there as well. We got some new reporting. We got interviews. We got ad-free versions of the podcast and hot takes. Where? Legal AF on Substack. Come over now to free subscribe.